On the inside cover of the book, there's the layout of the table of contents, and as I mentioned before, we pretty well follow the format that the test follows in terms of pre-licensing. The general portion of the exam is going to be found in chapters 1 through 7. 8 is where you're going to find the state law portion. And there is a little bit of replication in chapter 3 where it talks about the nature of the relationships that we have with consumers today.
But we've also added some videos on both consumer disclosure and property disclosure in chapter 3. So be sure to study that for the state law portion as well.
You also see on the inside cover of the pre-licensing manual some practice exams in here. In addition, we got a couple of maps on the inside. The first one on the left deals with surveying issues. It shows the meridians, which we're going to talk about here later in chapter 1. And then the judicial districts, which become important from the perspective of the appointment of real estate commission members, court cases, and etc. So those are the two images that you see on the top of the inside cover. Now in chapter 1, property law, public and private rights and limitations, addresses a sort of the history of real estate and how it's evolved over the years. When we look at real estate, sometimes the rules don't seem to make any sense today, and maybe they don't, but they did in the 15 and 1600s, which is where these rules came from. So we have to look sometimes at the historical tradition to understand how real estate kind of works for us. And so in this first little section, you'll notice that there's some dark and bolded areas. That's a reflection of you really want to know that for the test. Now everybody's got those magic markers, correct? Everybody's got a highlighter. So as I'm going through the test from time to time, I'll say, use some code words. I'll say things like, highlight this. You'll probably see it on the test. And when you hear that, you should think, how to highlight this? This might be on the test. And that would be wise. So as we're going through it, as you paint, you don't have to paint the whole book. There's reasons why they're darkened and bolded already. It's why, so that you can save some of those highlighter ink costs. And the first element that we want to look at is the real estate was historically looked at initially as a right. It wasn't seen so much as the thing that you owned, because up until the 1600s, you didn't have the right to own real estate. Back in those days, you had one of two stations in life. You either owned the castle or you were owned by the person that owned the castle. You were chattel, you were cattle, you were privately owned, we were slaves. In that sort of a format, when we gained individual rights to actually own real estate, that was a big deal. You changed your class status. You've heard the term landed gentry. When you gained ownership to real estate, it was seen as the rights that you were gaining. So when I transferred real estate to you, typically it would be a ceremony. Most of us didn't read a lot back in those days, and so when I transferred ownership of real property to you, the ceremony would include me passing a bundle of sticks that were tied together. Now each of those sticks represented a right that you were earning as a result of becoming a new member of the landed gentry. You were going to own real estate. So the rights became known as the bundle of rights, which you see darkened and bolded there, so you want to highlight that. And the specific rights, you'll also see darkened and bolded, which you should know, are the right of possession. That means that if I sold you the piece of property, you had the right to occupy it. The right of control, which meant that you were the one that could determine certain interests of others. The right of enjoyment, which was the possession without harassment or interference. The right of exclusion, legally refusing to create interests for other people. The right of disposition, you could sell it if you chose to. Or the right of encumbrance, and that was the right to use this real estate as collateral for a loan. So those were the rights that you were receiving historically, and they were called the bundle of rights. Now as we evolved, we became accustomed to those rights. We presumed, of course, those rights went along with it. Then ownership of real estate shifted not so much from the perspective of the rights that you had, but the thing itself. And so you see, the modern view, we think of property as the thing, not the rights. And so property is either real or personal, and real property consists of the land, anything that is regarded as a permanent part of the land, so the trees, the building, etc. That which is incidental or pertinent to the land. This would include rights, water rights, etc., the right to get onto the property, and that which is immovable by law, so the rocks and etc. So those are all considered what represents real property. Now the way that this book